Hi, my name is Dorian, and this is You, Me, and the Industry. A show where I get to talk to people from the games industry and talk with them about a wide range of topics. And sometimes I just hang out with the CEO of a company, I guess. And not any CEO. With me this time is Rebekah Saltsman, one of the founders of the indie publisher and development studio Finji, which she runs together with her husband Adam Saltsman and a bunch of other great people. They worked on and published games such as Night in the Woods, Overland, and Canabout. We talk about what it's like to run a company, how the industry deals with Corona, Bekah gets to share some baking tips with us, and we finally have the answer on who is better, Greg or B. You don't want to miss this one. Here we go. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Today I'm joined by an extremely cool guest. It's Rebekah Saltsman. Rebekah Saltsman actually, not Saltsman. And she is the co-founder and CEO of the video game publisher Finji, which she founded in 2006 together with her husband Adam Saltsman. And they publish games such as Night in the Woods, Feast, and the recently released Overland. And they're going to publish in the future Tunic, which I'm extremely excited about, and Chicory, which just finished a Kickstarter a few months ago. Bekah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How are things these days? How are you doing?
They're a bit wild. I'm not going to lie on that front. With the COVID-19 pandemic stuff going on and sort of ratcheting up in the States, we are homebound indefinitely. So, yeah, I've got my kids in the house all the time. We're running Finji out of the house all the time. And yeah, it's just kind of weird, to be perfectly honest. Weird times to be alive, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine having a full house, kids running around, dogs running around, and also managing multiple little teams. Looking forward with one team with the with Kickstarter like Chicory, and also looking backwards with something like Night in the Woods, which is constantly going. And I don't know, it sounds like really difficult to manage, I would assume.
Yeah, the funny thing though, Finji's been sort of like a remote studio since its inception, basically. So Adam and I have always been working out of our house. That was supposed to change in about 2 weeks when we opened our first office. That's just sort of been delayed until we're allowed to leave our house again. But like the internal Finji staff is all remote. Only 2 other staff, Finji staff actually live here in Michigan near us. But the other 5 are actually all over the United States. So it was like an easier transition than probably most studios, but not also turning into a homeschool mom overnight and homeschool dad overnight, because now we're kind of in charge of keeping our kids from murdering each other with violence. So we're like, let's homeschool, because then we can at least sort of keep them busy with interesting activities and learning new things. So it's challenges I honestly never thought that I would have to engage with, specifically trying to run the education of my children on top of running the studio.
Yeah, and is the transition going well with the being able to being a homeschool teacher now? Like, did you think it was more hard?
I always would joke sort of with friends, because I have a few friends who actually do homeschool for a variety of reasons. And I was like, I'm just not cut out for this. I don't know what I would do. This is not something I'm ever interested in. But because of how my brain just works, I sort of run through possibilities of things all the time. So I joke in other talks sometimes about having backup plans. But for me, that also means I sort of do thought experiments on eventual outcomes or different things that could come our way, and how would we respond to it, and what various ways could we respond to it. And one of them at multiple points sort of raising our kids was, what if I had to homeschool? Like, what if my kid was being bullied so bad at school that my only option was to bring him home? And what would I do if I were going to homeschool? So when that actual reality came down sort of, I don't know, 7, 8, 12 days ago, last week was our first week. So the week before that, I was like, oh, I've kind of already thought through this, and my kids aren't in high school. There's no online school for them. And this is what I would do, because I've sort of already thought through it. And I picked the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of this stuff. Like for science, we're exploring the solar system right now because 1, it's cool. Two, it's like no brainer with art projects. Three, Netflix has all sorts of documentaries that I can access. And same thing with like BBC Online. Like you can just get a hold of stuff. And that allows me to sort of figure out how to do harder stuff in like 2 weeks. So a lot of this was just trying to like buy time. So yeah, it's been okay. The thing I found is like you just have to change up their activity every 45 to 90 minutes, depending on what they're doing. So like they can write for 30 to 45 minutes. Maybe they can read for 30 to 45 minutes, but like recess, man, just let them run around outside for 90 minutes, which we are sort of privileged. We're sort of tucked away into a less populated area of our city. So they have a backyard to run around in and like a big empty field behind our house, which is just sort of America problems. But I know other friends that's a lot harder because their sort of house footprint or their apartment footprint or condo footprint is much smaller. So outdoor times is actually a lot harder for them to schedule.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think probably a lot of adjustments had to be made, especially in like also game development stuff. People, like, I mean, I guess it's an industry that's pretty used to being able to work for remotely, but I still think a lot of companies haven't actually prepared enough or are expecting something like this to happen.
Well,
So yeah, big companies are
the
shutting down and everything. It's kind of like still crazy to me, but yeah.
especially for the video game industry, it actually isn't surprising that it's really hard for them to figure this out.
Oh, really?
Um, like for like biz dev or like management. So if you're talking about like, maybe ID at Xbox staff or like Nintendo third party staff, it's different because you can sort of VPN in and access kind of all of your stuff from wherever you are. But for an actual game studio and how locked down their development and assets have to be, like you just can't take your work computer home. And that's been something they've had to discuss. Like they just don't, access their source repo up on Git for, 1,000 people working on 3 different continents. So like, especially for the larger companies, because of all the security generally involved in making a game and all the contracts you have to sign, like some of these companies just have, I'm guessing, next gen hardware, not like, because they just sort of send around computers for like the big AAA companies. Like last year, like they're working on next gen games. They just can't send that home. And they're kind of having to figure that out now on the fly. I have friends who sort of work for larger companies who have just like, they've just been watching their IT department try to figure this problem out in, a few days. Because there's like a lot of marketing budgets and stuff like on the line here. They have to get this game done by a certain point. I mean, no matter how good you are at scheduling, this is not on your schedule for sure. Is your entire staff gets quarantined in their houses for,
Yeah.
2 to 12 weeks. I mean, who knows how
Yeah.
long they're going to be home.
Exactly.
I know some friends have, like, they went home and they were just like, we'll be in touch, basically. And then they have had their computers, like the IT department must have gone in, installed a bunch of stuff for them to access their assets, or they're trying to VPN in doing art assets. Like, and there's lag, and they've had their computers shipped to their house. It's been really weird sort of watching friends just be like, I don't know how I'm supposed to work like this, but this is what I'm doing. On top of like, having their spouse home, their partner home, their kids home, college students who weren't ever supposed to come back home, moving back in. Like it's a very weird time right now, kind of for companies and for employees and creatives. And what would be disappointing is if people didn't, if especially management didn't understand that. Like, so if people's productivity drops, I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's gonna drop.
Yeah.
And like if things get delayed, yeah, there's a lot of money on the line, but there's just globally, there's a lot of money on the line right now. And we should definitely start thinking about like the grace that we have to give ourselves and the people that work with us and the people around us to sort of get through this while keeping up some semblance of a normal life.
Yeah, I totally get you. Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, maybe that's a good transition, but maybe a question that is not so sure anymore, because I wanted to ask you, what does it mean basically to run a small indie publisher now in 2020? But yeah, this is now a big X factor right now. Nobody knows probably for the next, I don't know, a year maybe. But like, what would you say, like maybe before the virus outbreak? How was the situation currently with being a publisher right now?
I mean, it was already pretty hard. And to be perfectly honest, Finji is a very weird publisher because we're also an independent developer as well. Like my staff is half development staff because Overland is our game. We made it, which is why, I only launch one game a year, maybe one big game and one small game a year. Like our output is low, but that it's very high for a developer, if that makes sense. So we already weren't launching a big title this year. So for us, we were kind of already in a call it like float year where we are supporting our existing titles while we finish up our next big titles. So for me, I have the ability to kind of wait and see a little bit because I don't have any major releases coming out this year. So it kind of hasn't changed much on the Finji front, except we're moving a bit slower. So like my Overland 1.2 update that we were hoping to get out like by end of April probably will be more like June, just because of logistical issues. One, Adam had to cut his hours because of kids being home. Two, I don't know how, like my porting studio is currently trying to figure out how to work from home in Austin, Texas. Three, a bunch of my staff were like literally moving in April and May, and that's just gotten really complicated because they were moving states. So my internal update, which had no deadline anyways, is delayed. That's fine. And there's a couple other sort of like littler projects, like, my Bandcamp vinyls for Overland are going to be delayed because worldwide shipping is messed up, plus other companies are in lockdown or shut down, shelter in place. Like, so I have delays on stuff, but none of the delays for me and my company are sort of hard tied to the studio staying open or super big financials, which is just sort of the weird place we're at. If this happened last year, I would have I'd still be crying. I'd be crying for like 3 or 4 weeks because we were trying to finish up our game. And if my company got paused for 5 weeks or had to go on the schedule last year, like I don't know how I would have dug myself out of that hole. So I understand that I have a lot of friends and fellow studio directors who are kind of looking at this being like, oh God, this is a hole I'm going to have to dig out of. And including publishers. Like, I don't know how you launch a game in 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, nobody's doing anything. Like, everyone's sort of stuck at home. So playing video games is high and higher than normal. And I don't know how long people are going to be able to live in their Animal Crossing town with how much everyone's spending in their Animal Crossing town right now.
It's true.
Like, usually that's over 6 months instead of 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's possible that like we'll be able to sort of float through, like the industry will constrict because it always does, even in a recession, but it doesn't collapse usually. And lower priced games will do better because they're affordable. And also games that have a lot of hours that you can sink into them and it'd still be fun. Those will do pretty well. So I don't know. For us, it's almost business as usual, which feels weird to say with how wild everything is, except we're not traveling. So like our main thing is how do you stay relevant when we don't have our FaceTime with our people anymore? Not just our staff, but like we do panels and talks and meet face to face with my dev relations and at the consoles and the platforms. And we're just sort of like figuring that out sort of step by step right now. My worry, if I can speak a little bit longer, is
Sure.
the teams that were coming like last week that were supposed to be at GDC, and that's where they were going to make that connection to launch their game, because maybe they come from a place that is just harder to get FaceTime with like a North American studio. So a lot of like overseas devs outside of North America, like GDC is a big push to pitch to everybody. It's important to like get your game out on social media and like raise awareness on your own, but those partnerships are key to independent developers, whether getting face-to-face time with a publisher or a console or whatever. And my concern is because those aren't happening. Like, I know the devs are worried, but I know the dev relations also have got to be worried because how are they going to find games to fill their platform? And I mean, two of the consoles are coming out with new systems. Like there's a lot of internet, and it's very, very hard to see the good things when they're far away and you don't know. Maybe they're undiscovered, I guess, or it's a new team that just got put together. So I'm actually kind of that piece I am very worried about, just as like an independent who wants beautiful, amazing things to exist.
But do you think something like Twitter can there be as like a amplifier for that? Be like spread awareness of these games. I think probably like most of the people are now constantly watching their Twitter feed, Instagram, and something. Do you think like now is the time to actually try to promote yourself via Twitter, like trying to survive the Animal Crossing content, of course. But I mean, like, is there something? Do you think that there's a publisher like Finji that could actually step in and say, you know what, let's just try to raise awareness and like spread these trailers or like these sort of short pictures of something? Or do you think it
Yes.
will still be the very basic of it? It will be just delayed basically to the next GDC.
Um, so there's several things. Like one of the main questions I get often when I'm out wandering about is, well, how do I get people to notice my stuff? And obviously you have to put your stuff out there to get noticed. But the problem with that is if you don't have people looking at it to share it with their networks, it doesn't go anywhere. And you can see them all the time. You'll see like a Twitter account with 2 followers and nothing gets retweeted, and maybe 2 or 3 people will like it. And the game might be amazing, but because they don't have a network already, it's very hard to see it. Like something like that would never come across my it would never come across my Twitter feed. I mean, my Twitter feed's a bad example because I literally follow no one and use it very sparingly. It's almost more of a Twitter for me is more of a broadcast rather than an engagement. And that's just how I use Twitter because I'm weird. Um, but like if you're kind of in a position where maybe your local scene is very small and the people in your local scene don't have much reach out of your local scene, it's kind of like you're behind this invisible fence of getting noticed because like publishers and streamers and influencers and mavens, whatever you want to call the people who spread stuff, have a lot of people sending stuff at you to spread, which like is important for us to do, like is to highlight cool stuff. Like that's kind of, just as an industry and as a person, if you love video games, what you should be doing. But at a place like GDC, for example, yes, like our friends from all over the world are coming in to San Francisco, and yes, they're meeting with a lot of people, but almost more importantly, they're meeting developers who already have networks and will start talking about your in development thing with their network. And then more developers, because the majority of the people who follow me are developers or students. And once you start sharing it with developers, eventually that will get out to consumers. So what I always told people before everyone got stuck at home was meet your local community and join an online group of some sort. You have to meet people outside of your local community in order for your project to get out of it. And that's not to say your game will succeed or your game will get funded or anything like that, but if you don't attempt to get out of your sort of region, it is going to be very hard to get it in front of somebody sitting in Seattle or a publisher based in Europe. So Adam and I, we mentor so many people in the industry already. And usually it's a huge thing that we do at GDC. And because of lockdown and homeschool and everything else, we haven't actually been able to schedule all of our mentorship meetings that we usually do at GDC. We've only been able to get one scheduled because everything just keeps changing. But I have like both me and Adam plus the Finji team and specifically the Finji marketing team, along with Felix, who we talked about earlier, who does sort of PR for us and is the producer on Tunic. All of us are currently working with people kind of outside of Finji specifically to figure out in what ways we can highlight projects and get projects in front of eyeballs who need to see them to sort of bridge that gap. And not as like a weird gatekeeper or whatever. It'd just be projects we were interested in someday having anyways, and just using our networks to bring them a little bit of visibility. And that can be super weird. You can't pull out like a call for something like that because you'd just be inundated with a billion projects. So it's kind of like sort of spreading out your own weird networked spider webs and being like, who who doesn't have reach and was relying on these events to get reach and has a really cool project, how do they need an introduction to somebody? And um, this is stuff we've done sort of quietly behind the scenes for years because again, Finji only publishes like 1 or 2 games a year tops, and sometimes that's just one of ours. Um, but when you see a project and they need an introduction, maybe to a publisher or a console, like you just kind of make that happen, and kind of everybody does, um, because it's the only way that we're able, even with events going on, to find the really cool things that exist, that we know are actually going to get done. So, long answer to a very difficult question right now.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. But yeah, you mentioned a couple of interesting points also about the kind of like the jobs or basically the job that a publisher has now these days, and basically also the responsibility of a publisher these days. Do you think this is changing, or do you think the things that a publisher now has to do is now getting more hard to define and also more involved? Basically, they have to do now everything basically, or is it more constricted now, more reduced?
Um, yeah, it's going to be a little bit constricted because they don't have events really right now, and that's a huge marketing burn. Um, so I'm curious. I don't actually know because everyone's having to morph everything very, very quickly. Like, if they don't have these huge marketing burns, are they going to like ramp up online advertising buys, with various things? Are they going to host online events? Are they going to hire another maybe social media person, to sort of ramp up and take over various social media accounts? And that I'm not sure. I'm not I'm not even 100% sure what Finji is going to actually fall into, but we already do a lot of things to sort of cultivate our own community on the internet, um, with our community manager and our own personality. And my assumption, honestly, is a lot of the publishers will have to move over into that weird space or provide more resources for their teams to manage that space. Because where it wasn't maybe always 100% necessary, it feels like it's getting more and more so. But again, like events are for people willing to spend money to go to an event. So it's already like in the realm of a bit of privilege in the first place, where you're often talking to video game super fans and not just sort of the average person playing games at home. So yeah, I mean, publishers do a ton already. You know, they help with your budgeting. They are there kind of as mentors. In Finji's case, we are mentors for design and tech and kind of art and whatever you need. Like Adam often helps the teams get set up with like their repos, their cloud repos. Like, but that's just because we can. And a lot of publishers don't do stuff like that. But I can imagine with people being forced into sort of like a more remote situation, like publishers might start looking into bringing on consultants to provide this resource for teams, that may not have sort of local or already established access to people they could reach out to. At least I hope they are, because there's just not enough professional mentors in the industry to help teams with sort of all these problems that we would normally do sitting out having drinks with another development team, like at a show, like, or even just meeting them at a show. So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and you also said on your Twitter multiple times that basically that as an indie publisher you can't launch a game in the fall or in the winter. Basically, is this still true for 2020, or I mean 2020 is still a big unknown. But I mean, let's say for the future, do you still think it's will never be possible as an indie publisher to launch in these time periods?
I in general prefer not to ever touch November or December, just because you're running up against like Christmas, one, sales, and two, like AAA launch dates. You can, like, I've launched second console, like Night in the Woods and Feist actually, I think launched on December 16th in different years, but it was their second launch on a console. And I 100% could have launched Night in the Woods like in October, like for sure, and it would have done great. But I feel like if you're going to go into these like already pretty heavy advertising AAA spaces, you need to have a really good hook in order to bring eyeballs like to your project. So either you need to be well known enough to sort of get through the like hype machines of much bigger projects, or have a really, really, really good partnership with a console that can sort of you're sort of one of the top tiers on their marketing below AAA. Like there are circumstances where I would do it, but if I didn't have that kind of marketing reach or those assurances in place, I would avoid it. And to be perfectly honest, this is not true every single year. Like Q1 this year, what a miserable time to launch. Like, I mean, we're still in like the first quarter, and you have Doom and Animal Crossing and Alex, like which was like yesterday or something, and that's just the tail
Yeah.
end. But all of these titles, there are a lot of titles that are launching right now that are sort of end of life on past gen console. So just a lot of AAA that's been coming out because it needs to get out before the next gen stuff. And that's not usually the case. There's another time, like I never launch around the 4th of July. That's like just a weird time for me. Like one, I don't want to be managing a launch because I would rather be at the beach. But like in if your main audience is a North American audience, like I'm not the only one that would rather be at the beach. Like there's so many just like outdoor events around like the first 2 weeks of July that like it might be good for a game that travels well. So maybe you're going on a road trip. Switch may not be that bad to
Yeah.
launch in those 2 weeks, but I wouldn't do like I wouldn't do a single player game during that time. Um, just because like 'cause I know what kind of single player game I would have, and it would just do better launching either in June or holding it till August. Because I wouldn't be hype enough to be able to bring eyeballs to their console rather than going outside and like laying in a hammock.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. And yeah, you just mentioned Night in the Woods, which is an incredible title. Still, congrats on that. Really, really awesome. And you said recently on Twitter that it actually came out just like 3 years ago, and I've been reading through your thread about yeah, basically the last hours or last days upon release, and it kind of made my head spin. It was just like really intense reading it. Like yeah, basically how did you pull this off? It was just like I don't know, like it was kind of like it's almost reads like a fever dream to me. You know, I don't know. It's like yeah.
I don't know. So Night in the Woods was supposed to launch, which we never even announced this launch date, in October of 2016, and it obviously was not done. And then it was supposed to launch on January 10th, and like the tracking on the assets that need to be finished was not as robust as we thought. We implemented a bunch of checks for sort of our publishing projects after Night in the Woods in order to ensure that this sort of thing never happened again. Specifically with like tracking assets and the time that it takes to finish those. So we came up to like basically the last day that we could delay the January 10th launch and delayed it to February 21st. I think it was, yeah, February 21st. And it wasn't clear how much still needed to be done until we sort of got into very late January. And a whole host of very funny things now looking back happened. Like the team had auto update on Unity set up, and it like auto updated to a new Unity version like a month before launch. So we had to spend like 2 days rolling that back because it was just like an accident. And then we sort of got into the last sort of week before launch, and Scott actually ended up getting pretty sick, which he's talked about sort of personally. It's also, he talks about how like we ended up thanking his kitty that just passed, Ico or Eco, I can't remember how he pronounced it. Because we have two. We have one Ico and one Eco. Scott and Bethany's old cat, and then our audio director's dog also is named either Ico or Eco, but they're each one of those two pronunciations. So yeah, Scott ended up getting really sick and ended up like at an urgent care. And then we sort of realized that the team had been working crazy hours And we had already done pre-sales, like pre-orders on the game. So we kind of came down to like we needed to launch this game, and it needed to be finished in about like 5 or 6 days. So Adam did a bunch of environmental art because he was kind of the only person I know in the world who could just, and that's Adam Saltsman, my husband, only person in the world who can just do stuff that he's never done before, and do it well. He's kind of a absolutely amazing person because of this trait in particular, among others. But he ended up going in and mimicking Scott's art style and just started burning down assets. And yeah, I was testing it all night long, every single night. And just tons of assets and gameplay were just sort of dropping into the game at like this crazy speed. And then I had built the wrong version for launch for Steam. He built it with the debug keys still in it, like the debug version, and realized partway through and had to cancel out. So our Steam versions dropped in like 2 minutes before 10 a.m. Pacific on launch day. But it's also why like the Humble and GOG and itch.io versions were late because those were literally still building. And this was back before like GOG Galaxy had like a easy uploading system. And so we had to like send them the files, like 4 gig, and then they had to pull it down and upload it on their side. Like it was crazy. And then we kept finishing up the game for the next several days. So we had a hot fix on our PlayStation version for like 3 or 4 days straight. And we actually only had we had 2 good bugs. One on some PlayStations, we sort of blew out memory by a little bit, sometime in Act 3. And then, yeah, we had we built in the debug keys to the PlayStation version, but forgot that people could hook up a keyboard. So some people had ended up getting into like the original E3 demo instead of the game. So yeah, the whole Night in the Woods launch was not intended, and because of it, we now have, with all of our teams and our own team, we have an insane number of sort of checks to make sure that our teams are never put in that position again, because the team absolutely crunched themselves and paid for it afterwards. It was a crazy experience. And then the game is just beautiful and lovely, and the story's incredible. Like I still get chills every time I hear the end credits and like Bethany's name pops up, and like I always feel like crying, and I just got it again because I just remembered it. I just get like chills up and down my spine because it's a very special game.
Yeah, and basically this is a good segue to the question related to this. Do you think it's the responsibility of a publisher to step in when they realize there's a crunch happening right now, or crunch happening at all, basically?
So I have very strong opinions on this because I believe it's everyone's responsibility to step in. In the case that we had, because we actually stopped because I was willing to burn every relationship I had with every console I had, to fix this for the team, when Scott ended up like at urgent care and super sick and realizing just how much content still needed to go in, before our launch 6 days later. We actually had the conversation, which was, should we continue working on the game, or should we do 6 more days? Well, it ended up being like 8 more days, and have it just be done. Like finish this game, do 6 hard days together with all of us. And I brought in like a ton more testers. Like the number of people working on Night in the Woods by the time it launched was like 6x on the original team size, because I started calling in every favor I had, like with testers specifically. I just had people staying up all night with me, working on various versions of the game. And I was willing 100% to delay this for as long as they needed to. That was a thing I was willing to do as a publisher. And had I known because we were asking the right questions, but had I been able to see through sort of the words the team was saying, I would have understood better the situation that the game and the team was in. But again, this was like one of our first main games. We had never actually done this before, so Adam and I were learning at the same time. Now that I know better, um, I have started asking, and Adam has started asking these questions just way earlier. And I know that it is my job to ensure that my teams don't crunch, to make sure that we are able to find more money for those teams. So, if in order to preserve the mental health and physical health of my team members, we need to bring on artists or technology or whatever. It is always my job to find that money and also have some pretty aggressive talks with the dev teams as far as what is realistic and what we are willing to tolerate because our goal is to keep making games with people and also for people to want to make games after they launch their game. And if you almost die doing it, like, what the hell are we doing with our lives that you're willing to die to make a game? And that's just like a sobering thought in general. Like, there's a lot of things to die for. Making games is not one of them and should not be one of them because that's crazy. So, yeah, like, is it the publisher's responsibility to ensure that the person who doesn't work in your office is keeping good hours? It's their responsibility to ask the questions and to be very forceful about the bad work-life balance that they see. And sure there can be consequences or whatever. There's some big studios who have taken a pretty aggressive stance. I actually got a note from one of the consoles last year that said, if your team crunches, you don't get to launch on our platform,
Oh,
um,
wow.
which is amazing. I don't even know if that's actually been stated publicly, but which console this was. But I was just like, yeah, hell yeah, I agree with that because uh, that is what we are striving for over here. And that's not to say working over 40 hours is crunching, but crunch is like systemic power dynamics or hurting yourself to make a game. And that's not how we should be living. Like accepting a work sprint for 2 weeks is not crunch. Um, if your work sprint lasts for 2 months, that's crunch. That's different. So people just need to kind of be honest with themselves about what that actually looks like.
Mhm. And can you elaborate on what kind of questions a publisher should ask? Like what type of questions maybe to get the right answers?
So we do even just with our team because we're all remote based. We now do we do a biannual survey where I ask my employees how many hours a week are they working. When we were launching Overland, a big thing that we were asking is, hey, how many hours are you working? Do you need to pass something off? And you can sort of see, like, because even on our partner projects, we're on their Slacks, like their work communications. So we can sort of see when people are online. And from very early on, we sort of developed that relationship to be able to ask the questions like, hey, I noticed you're working pretty late last night, or you seem like you're working pretty late, or you seem like you're kind of stressed out about this particular um, thing. How are you doing? Do you need to work on something else? Like, are you sleeping okay? And that's just like, yes, I'm a publisher, and yes, I understand that that gives me this other power, but my whole goal is to not be treated like that. I want to be treated like a friend who cares about you because I do. Um, and I understand that there's like some difficulties kind of in that relationship, but like we should be asking that. And if the answer comes back, it's like, yeah, man, I'm like dying. There's no way I can get this done unless I work like back to back 60-hour weeks. And I just can't do that. Like, it is your job as a publisher to be like, whoa, 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 okay. Do we need to change this launch date? And can you, as a publisher, because it's your job to fix it, can you fix the launch date? Like the developer can't fix it. You can. You can make some phone calls, send some emails, and buy your dev an extra 8 weeks or whatever they need. And sometimes, like the developer, the better thing for the developer, and this was the case with Night in the Woods, was it just needs to get out. If it lingered, if it lasted even longer, it would just have feature creep to be even, it would be just as bad if we had launched it 8 weeks from February 21st. And that was the conversation we had is like, no, this has to go. We're done. So whatever's not in there, we cut it. Um, and like that's also like an okay question to have like as a publisher. And they come back with that. You should be able to sit down and be like, well, what do you have left and how much time does it take? And if you're looking at that list and you have a month of development left and they're like, we need to do the opening animatic, which is this 90-second long animation, cut that crap out. You don't need it. That is uh, fluff
Mm.
in an indie game. You can cut that sort of thing out. And you should look and be like, oh, that's like some weird side quest. Nope, cut it. Cut it out. You don't need that. The game is perfect without it. No one will know it's gone. And that was the thing we did with Night in the Woods is what can we cut from this to-do list and no one would ever notice that it's not there. Like a thing Scott said after launch was like, God, Night in the Woods just looks so sparse, which is a wild thing to say out loud because you literally walk into like the snack falcon and all of the candies change every day. So it looks like people have gone in and purchased candy from the snack falcon. Like that's in that game. It doesn't need to be there. No one would ever notice.
I haven't.
Yeah, exactly. No one would, but it's this tiny little thing. So like Scott's saying, Night in the Woods feels sparse. Like especially right after launch, I was just like, "Oh my God, there's so much stuff in Night in the Woods." No one would ever look at Night in the Woods and think that game is sparse. It's
Yeah.
big and empty. Like no, everything is alive. But like the creator has a vision of what that game is supposed to look like in their head, and he knows everything that's been cut.
Yeah.
Which is like as a publisher or as somebody as a producer, as somebody working with dev teams, even as a mentor, you need to understand that reality when working with creators is no matter what, they could work on that game for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you have to decide when is enough enough? Can the game be done? Because the game, honestly, will never be done. You can keep adding things forever, which is sort of like I've seen consumers talk about this in a very weird way because as creators, we understand that we couldn't quite literally never finish. There's not an end date of when we could like this is the last thing. We had to cut stuff to decide that this has to be the last thing.
Mhm.
Which yeah, it's just like this, like it's always a balancing act of and a question that you just have to ask. Is this enough?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Very great insights here. Yeah. So maybe two a little bit more lighthearted questions related to Night in the Woods. So you have like there are all those animals in Night in the Woods or represented by animals basically. So my question is, do you prefer Bea or Greg? Was it Bea or Greg?
B.
B.
So
Okay.
it's Beatrice. Um,
Beatrice. I called him a Beatrice, but
yeah.
that's wrong, I guess. Okay, B.
Well, it kind of depends on what part of the world
That's
you
true.
live in. In Michigan, it's just Beatrice.
Oh, I see.
Um, I love B. B is how I felt in high school. I wasn't quite so, emo goth. I was more cheerleader, super athlete, but like everything about B is just like I am her and she is me. She's just sort of like a darker, edgier version of like sort of bubblegum, bubblegum Bekah. But yeah, I know Greg. I've met my fair share of Gregs and Gregs and people in real life like Greg uh, always make me worry that they're going to jump off a roof onto a trampoline into an empty pool because they were dared to do it. And like, because I have friends who would do something that dumb. And Greg always feels like that one friend who is always doing crazy dares. So I just worry about Greg, but I love B.
I mean, the problem with the game right now for me is because recently I actually wanted to replay it, and I thought about it, and I thought about all the memories I had with the game. But then I thought also about like my favorite parts, and they were all involved with B. So I'm like, well, I actually want to see the Greg part actually, but but I think like this game feels now incomplete if I skip the B part because it feels so connected to my first experience when I played it. So I'm always like kind of tempted to like stick with B. So when I replay it.
Yeah, it was really interesting. After it first came out, everyone's like, "Oh my God, Greg!" And I know that they were just following kind of the funner path. And I was just like waiting for people. I'm like, man, you gotta just gotta hang out with B. And I remember talking to fans at the shows. I'm like, have you hung out with B yet? And they're like, no, I'm gonna start that when I get home. And I'm just like, just wait. Like, because the real, what feels like the real Midwest, the real sort of rural America is all so tied up in everything about B. Like the idea of being terrified that you will never leave the town that you're now stuck in. Like, I remember that feeling. And every time B says something even close to that about, I just couldn't go, I'm like, man, I have friends who have lived B's life. And like nothing about that is fiction. And then the like spoilers at the party scene, like it's all just so lovely and true. And yeah, Bethany and Scott just they did such an exceptional job with B. Everyone else, I love Angus, I love Greg, I love May, I love Lori. Oh my gosh, I love Lori so much. But like B's story is so real and so true to like rural America experience. That she's equal parts like heartbreaking and terrifying and makes you feel very uncomfortable often. And then you just want to hug her and tell her it's going to be okay, which is a weird feeling often to have while playing like a video game, like an alligator girl.
Yeah, very cool one.
Yeah.
I might say very cool.
I'm not cool enough to hang out with B.
That's true. And yeah, the second question would be, yeah, I saw that you have like these snickerdoodles that you made, and basically are now ingrained with the memory of launching the game. That's true, right?
It is true.
Yeah. So, do you have any recommendations for like how to make like a really good, authentic Night in the Woods snickerdoodle? Like, not maybe like recite the whole recipe, but are there like certain ingredients that truly that basically make them?
Well, snickerdoodles are actually like really simple cookies. A lot of like novice mistakes is they like people will sort of melt the butter too much, and like a good snickerdoodle needs to have like a like a really like just room temperature butter or a little bit colder and room temperature butter, and then you whip it with the like white sugar basically, whatever you use, and it sort of makes basically sugar butter. It's like a sort of a light pale yellow and super sweet. And it's like honestly, that's a cookie mistake in general people make. That's why your cookies always end up flat and like not correct when you bake them is because you messed up the butter at the beginning. So if you're going to make a really, really good cookie, make sure your butter is on the barely colder end of room temperature and whip the sugar into it. And then you'll end up with like a perfect like circle cookie. And also for snickerdoodles, they're supposed to be round when you put them on the tray. If you flatten them, they're going to end up too big because they have so much butter in them that they'll just like sort of melt out too thin. So yeah, I could talk about baking forever.
Oh, really?
I've been baking since I was very young.
Oh,
I'm
yeah, okay.
one of six kids, and the oldest daughter of, so I'm number four of six, and the oldest girl. And I grew up Mormon, so baking, and in the middle of nowhere. Like I lived out in like rural Michigan, so we baked everything because packaged cookies were too expensive. So I've been baking cookies since I was like 7 years old, and my mom let me use the oven. I didn't get good at it until I was an adult. We bake a lot over here.
Okay, I mean, here right now here in Europe, the flour is gone, and apparently we have the biggest what is it called, like the biggest crowd of bakers around here in my city, and I'm also always like, no one ever bakes here. Like why is everyone buying now flour and stuff? It like feels really strange that suddenly everybody's like a
A
like
chef.
a marathon runner and a chef and a baker and also like a toilet paper master chef. And I'm just like, I don't know, all these traits. I didn't realize anyone was closely to like that before the outbreak. So yeah.
Uh, we've had the same experience here. So we do bake bread. Adam, my husband really likes baking bread. Um, and we like make our pizza crust from scratch. And part of this, it's not because we're fancy. It's my husband has a lethal peanut allergy. So a lot of baked goods in the United States are contaminated with unknown peanuts and or nuts. And
Oh, okay.
they could kill him. So um, there's a bunch of stuff where it's just like it's just easier to make things from scratch, which is why I bake desserts now. And we do pizza crust because we have a person like one of my sons was actually allergic to milk for a really long time, so we had to make pizzas with no cheese on it, or with like dairy free cheeses or whatever. But also, our household doesn't eat pork, so you can't really get pizza with no like turkey pepperonis on it. So there's like all this stuff where it's just like, well, it's easier just for us to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
But I attempted to go in and just get like yeast, like, just regular old active dry yeast.
Yeah.
And it was just gone. And I'm like, who the hell in this city bakes bread?
Yeah.
Who,
Exactly.
who the hell in the States bakes bread, let
Yeah.
alone that much of it to buy out all of the yeast?
That's true.
This is wild. Um, so I was like, there's been a lot of that lately. Also, like I don't know how big people's freezers are because they bought out all the frozen pizzas first,
Yeah.
which was we don't buy those, but it was just weird.
Mhm.
Yeah, it- a lot of the things that are gone, like people bought out all the water, like we were having a hurricane or something. Like the water's not getting shut off.
Yeah.
We don't need the bottled water. Very, very strange. They
Mhm.
bought out all the Gatorade, not the Powerade.
Oh, 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 corner. Oh.
Like there's
Very
weird,
specific.
yeah, weird brand loyalty going on
Yeah.
as well. Like
Yeah. That's true.
everyone bought out all the rice, pasta,
Yeah.
and beans, and I'm like, what do you people eat in real life that you would need this much now?
Yeah, it's
Because
true.
I just went normal shopping.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
okay,
me
well,
too.
what do I want to eat for the next 3 weeks? And it was just like
Yeah.
a normal grocery shopping trip. Like, I need a
Yeah.
couple pastas, a couple pasta sauce, we'll make pizza. I have like, so we order like a third to a half of a cow from like a local farmer,
Oh,
like
that's nice.
once a year-ish, once every 18 months. So I do have a freezer in the basement, but that's just because
Hmm.
we can get like this well cared for, well loved cow when it
Yeah.
needs to be butchered like once a year. Um, uh, yeah, we already had a whole bunch of stuff sitting around, but I was just like, okay, well, I need some not frozen vegetables. Those are all gone. Okay, it looks like nobody's eating fresh veggies though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. We'll just get those. It's fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. Also, all the whole grain pasta and all the whole wheat what's called whole wheat the rice is also gone, like the whole grain rice. And
Yeah.
it's still there. I think this is like this. I think that's the most strange because they're still there. Like everything besides them are still is gone, but those are still there. I was
Oh,
like,
that's
okay,
yeah.
quite telling.
Yeah,
Quite
all the
telling to me.
gluten-free pastas are still there.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I know how to cook those so they taste good, but I
Yeah.
don't like to cook them because
Yeah.
they don't keep well in the fridge. But I was just
Yeah.
like, ugh, am I gonna have to just switch over to gluten-free stuff?
Yeah.
No, like my kids can just not have pasta as often
Yeah.
as they want it.
That's true.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh, sorry. We're gonna just keep coming back to the pandemic because
Ah,
holy crap.
that's it's a conversational podcast, and I don't mind switching topics constantly, so it's fine with me. But I know that on a different podcast you said that basically you're really one of your strengths is being able to handle a lot of bureaucracy with big companies. So
Yes.
is there actually a difference between dealing with like a big publisher like Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft, or are they basically like nowadays it's so streamlined everybody's now kind of on the same ground and the same like fighting ground?
Um, so it's not that they're all the same, it's that they're all very different and you engage with each one in a different way. Like you all have like the same end goal, get game on X. But sort of the way their internal setup works is just different. Like Their pitch processes are slightly different. The things they need for that are slightly different. I'm just excessively patient. A thing that like Adam and I learned early on is Adam gets very, very impatient. He thinks things should move a lot faster. We joke sometimes that he's the idealist and I'm the realist. And that's because like I handle people not responding to an email for a week just fine. If they don't respond back, that's fine. That means I don't have to take care of it. So I can just push that out even farther. And like, it's okay for my to-do list to just take forever to get done. Whereas Adam, even with like, oh, it's good to go back to the pandemic again. Adam's been like sort of bustling around the house, tidying things up. And that's how he's been referring to it. He's like, I just need to tidy this. And I'm like, it's fine, which is
Yeah.
which is also the difference in mine and Adam's house cleaning. He refers to my version of house cleaning as pile life.
Mm.
And
Relatable.
it absolutely, yeah, it absolutely drives him crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but my pile life also means that I'm fine with piles in my work as well.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
so if I'm working on something with Xbox or Nintendo and it's just a big pile that I'm waiting on feedback on, it's fine. I'll eventually get it. And I might have to, send a follow up or something back to them. But it's totally okay for this to sort of take too long. But I'm just very patient. So even in college, when I was like at university, when I was working through like my financial aid and needing to do work study stuff and like just not having enough to pay for tuition because I basically had to put myself through school while working, uh, being able to just like sit in an office and talk to like 10 people while trying to figure out a solution to my like, $3,000 or $4,000 that I need to cover. That like it's stressful because I had this problem, but I'm very good at sort of walking through the steps to fix it when the steps rely on other people to fix. So like yeah, that's what I mean when I'm good at bureaucracy. It's just like it'll get done. It'll get done eventually. And as long as I do all the things that I can on my side, I kind of can't control any of the other pieces, but I can sort of line up my dominoes in order and like flick them and hope that the dominoes that I lined up will go in the way that I want them to. So I spend a lot of time, I guess, lining up dominoes. And that's fine because I'm very patient when I am sort of engaging with problems like that.
Yeah, and with this show, basically, with you, me, and the industry, I allow my guests to bring their own topic to the show. And you weren't so sure what you want to talk about, but basically, you mentioned that, yeah, this is also a topic you also mentioned on Twitter a lot, being a mom and while also being a game developer and dealing with game developers. And I also had some questions prepared actually in this area. And I think now over the time, I think like I don't know, like it happened a few years ago. I think I see a lot of more people talking about being parents and also how to be a good mom, also and also be a good game developer at the same time. And there are a lot of more threads about this on Twitter. And yeah, do you see this as like a positive trend, or do you still feel this still very much underrepresented on Twitter and on the social media platforms?
I think it's underrepresented still, and that's a whole host of sort of like gender and bias sort of dynamics in the industry itself. But like Adam and I had kids, so I'm 39, and we started having kids when I was 30. So I've got a 9-year old and I have a 7-year old. And we were kind of the first, especially in like the indie scene. Like Jake Burkett's got kids that are older than mine. I think they're like teenagers now or something. So there are a few around, but also the indie scene was so small then. And a lot of indies after us have gone, like, do have kids now. Like, Derek Yu is a dad, and Kurt Gartner is a dad, and Ron Carmel is a dad. Yukio is a dad as of like last week. Like, kind of all over the world, a lot of people are sort of starting to have families. And a lot of this, like, to be perfectly honest, it's just because Adam and I are just older. Like, at 30, we were some of the youngest in the indie scene. like 28, because there just weren't that many of us. But it's been a decade, and all those kids that were like making Game Maker games back in like, 2009 are now in their 20s and mid 20s. So, you end up with like your Greg Lobanoffs and your Noel Berries and your Matt Thorsons. Like those kids were kids when I started going to GDC a decade ago. Kyle Pulver like was 19 when I met him a decade ago. Oh God, might have been 20, because I think Kyle might be 30 now. So it's just like it's just a consequence of our indie part of the industry growing up. But also on top of that, like it's a like the industry, like the larger companies also need to grow up, because the people in AAA had kids before. They just weren't able to talk about it much. And the online sort of social media aspects of it didn't exist. So you didn't know if people were parents. So I like, because I am a visible woman in game development, and my path into game development is not like I wanted to be a game developer in high school. So I went to college, I got a program. I didn't go into game development that way. My path is a little bit more squiggly. And I am a parent, and I run a studio with my husband. And like I have all of these pieces, and I'm kind of confident in a lot of them. Like, and I like being a parent. I've been visibly a parent for a long time, and it's kind of scary to be visible. But I'm okay doing it, which is why I talk about it. Partly because being a parent, like you fail all the time. Your kids are crazy. Your house is often a mess. You get phone calls about them cursing in the lunchroom, and like sometimes they get sick and you're terrified and you're sitting in the ER holding them down while they get IVs. Like all of these things are very important for like the human experience. And if somebody follows my Twitter and their only thought is, oh, there's someone else who wants the same sort of things that I want, I don't see that represented anywhere else. Like, that's cool, because I often find it difficult to find anyone like me in the games industry. Like people who didn't start out in games, who ended up in games, and who are confident being both a soccer mom and like a minor indie celebrity, like at shows, and can like, sit in a room full of people with, more money than God, and like hold their own. Like I don't see that represented anywhere. And if the only option for me is to provide that representation for others who sort of have that kind of same desire, then like I'll be that person.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, to be honest. And yeah, hopefully it will change. And I actually like to see these threads. I'm not a mom, obviously, but still interesting to read, and what people are going through while also being a game developer.
Yeah, it's actually so fun, because like our industry is just not that old. So like we really are like, there were the game developers of the 80s and 90s, but we really are the first set of game developers raising our kids with this kind of like social online access to games, and like how you really can interweave games into every fabric of your day-to-day life. Like my kids make games and play games and build prototypes of board games. Like they're working on a board game or a card game right now with Adam. Like it's just a cool way to show that you can raise your kids, and there's just no one like a game development parent in most communities. Like we're so spread out that like if we don't sort of reach out to each other, like I'm on a Discord full of game dev moms from all over the industry, and one dad. I think there's one dad on there, which I thought was great. Like if that's not if you have to build a community that understands you virtually, like let's build that community. Because like when I go to like my school's pickup, I have lots of friend parents at my boys' school, but that doesn't mean they really understand what it's like to launch a game, or understand my weird travel schedule, or what, being on stage at an E3 show means, and sort of like the ramp up for that. Like, or they just see me as this weird ass woman wearing, I joke about this all the time, but I really do wear Christmas leggings with like rain boots, like wellies, and like winter hats and like ugly hoodies to pick up and drop off year round. Like I just walk around in public like that because I don't care. And if like that, like the moms at school and the dads at school may not understand that I have this weird life sort of outside of like my small Michigan town. And to find somebody who understands that dichotomy, I guess, we just have to build up like our online communities. And part of that is me running a social media account that often tracks and talks about the wild things that come out of my children's mouth on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm. Yeah, and speaking of your life before games and in Michigan, so maybe before we're gonna wrap things up, let's go. I saw recently on Twitter trending that people are mentioning their careers and before they ended up in video games. So basically, maybe I just mentioned a few steps or a few career paths you chose before ending up in video games or leading up to them, and you just tell me maybe what you kind of learned from them and maybe how it helped you basically now managing basically indie devs at your at your publishing studio. So yeah, maybe like did something teach you being on the novice rowing crew team or being a head coach for cheerleading? Was there something that still sticks with you?
Don't overstretch yourself.
Okay.
I did both of those at the same time while also a pre-med student, and I failed hard. Uh, that was very stupid. That's when I started to learn how to say, no, you're not invincible.
And what about being a waiter for 2 years at the Olive Garden?
Uh, Infinite patience. Also, I hate the Olive Garden. Like the food, I can't stand even the smell of the building. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I got very good then. I was already good at juggling lots of things, but the service industry sort of kind of puts you at the lowest rung on any ladder, and people will treat you like garbage, both clients, coworkers, and management. And we always joke that you can sort of spot a person or a coworker or a friend who's never worked in the service industry as a bartender or a server or in retail or at a grocery store or as a cashier or something. And I stand by that. You really can spot it. And yeah, I don't know. Working at the Olive Garden, one, taught me how to budget and pay for college. Two, proved to me that I cannot stand the Olive Garden food or the smell of the building. And three, that humanity is both beautiful and horrible, usually minutes apart from table to table.
Yeah, and finally, something maybe more recent. Is there something that one of the biggest takeaways you had was dealing with indies and working on your publishing studio with Finji?
Uh, Oftentimes, the most comfortable place to be is kind of head down in our own circle. And that's a main reason, actually, a big reason why we do publish things is because we do not have our heads down, only paying attention to our own circle. And my main takeaway, sort of working with other indies, is that we kind of always need to be yelling at each other and reality checking everyone to make sure that they are paying attention to the industry that vastly changes under our feet on like a day-to-day basis. Because some of the wild ideas that people have about how this industry works, which might only be 6 months old or 2 years old or a decade old, depending on who you're talking to. We should always get our heads out of the sand, watch out for other people, and pay attention to the way the industry is morphing all the time.
Yeah, again, perfect wrap up, I would say. Nothing to add here from my side. So yeah, that's the end of the show, I guess. And Bekah, I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for joining and being on the show. Is there anything you want to plug right now, and anything you want, maybe social media or upcoming games?
Yeah, so you can follow me. We've talked about my Twitter a bunch at Bex Saltsman. That's BEXSALTSMAN. That's my personal Twitter account. If you want to follow Finji and all of our news, you can follow us at Finji, FINJICO. We also have a cool Discord where we actually hang out and a lot of my devs hang out. And if you want to check out some of our existing games and upcoming games, you can check out our website at www.sbcgames.com. finji.co. But yeah, we're everywhere all the time and super accessible day to day, especially in our Discord. So we just really do hang out in there and chat, and it's a fun place to be.
Yeah, awesome. And if you want to follow me or the show, basically, you can follow me on Twitter. That is you at Yumi Industry, and also on Instagram. I do usually post funny pictures there where I draw something related to the episode. And you can leave us a review on iTunes. We're also on Spotify. And if you want to follow my personal Twitter account, which I had for a number of years, but only started using more frequently now, it's at Dorian Chow. It's DORIANCHOU. And speaking of Finji, before we finally close it off, I know for a fact that basically Finji wasn't always going to be the name for the company. That's true, right?
That is true.
Yes, and I do know that it was at one point supposed to be called the Bearing Institute.
Oh God, these are all of Adam's really bad names. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so basically with Finji you have all those great animals, and also you have with the logo on Finji, it's a weasel, right?
Yeah, it's like a stoat, sort of like a white sort of snow weasel.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, so that's awesome. So let's say now we're in a weird parallel universe, and not the name was not Finji anymore, and it's now the Bearing Institute. So basically, can you pitch me basically what do you think the animal would be? And I'm going to draw the logo of the Bearing Institute, and I'm going to publish it on Twitter and Instagram. So please check that out. And I'm going to do like a quick scribble. It will not be able to change for that much if I even take 2 hours. But I will do my best to make a quick scribble and just name the animal and maybe something that goes alongside with it. And then we're going to see how it will turn out, I guess.
Okay, so it has to be something long, because I would never be able to get anything else by Adam. Because he's obsessed with snakes and corgis. So if I had to pick one, it has to be a corgi.
Corgi, okay.
It's a dog, yep.
Yeah,
big
sure.
ears.
Oh yeah, big ears. Oh yeah, okay.
And it'd probably have one derpy ear.
One derpy ear, okay.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm already drawing it, so okay. Yeah, okay. So one derpy ear, I guess it's like this.
Yep.
Something like this, okay. And then we have some nice cute round eyes. Okay, sure. Oh, I can already see it. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to finish it right now, and then you will see the end result probably very soon. I'm going to send it to you right after this, the episode, and then you tell me what you think about the incredible cute Bearing Institute corgi, I guess. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keep your eyes out on the next episode, and stay inside, stay healthy. Play some Animal Crossing. Play Night in the Woods. Follow moms on Twitter. And check it out soon. Okay, bye.
Bye.